Hello, welcome back to Rejuvenated Women, Impeccable Health for High-Performing Women. I'm really excited to be joined today by Jennifer. I just realized, how do you pronounce your name? Hello, welcome back to Rejuvenated Women, Impeccable Health for High-Performing Women. I'm your host, Dr. Alex Swenson-Ridley, and today I'm really excited to be joined by Jennifer Fugo. Jennifer is an clinical nutritionist empowering adults who've been failed by conventional medicine to beat chronic skin and unending gut challenges. She has experience working with conditions such as eczema, psoriasis, rosacea, dandruff, and highs, with clientele ranging from regular folks to celebrities and professional athletes. Jennifer also founded her own line of skincare and supplements available at the quellshop.com, specifically for people struggling with these chronic skin issues. She holds a master's degree in human nutrition from the University of Bridgeport and is a licensed dietitian, nutritionist, and certified nutrition specialist. Her work has been featured on Dr. Oz, Reuters, Yahoo, CNN, and many podcasts and summits. She's a faculty member of the Learn Skin platform and an Amazon bestselling author and host of the Healthy Skin Show. So Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So I shared with you before we started, I talk a lot about gut health and other stuff, but I haven't really talked specifically about skin on the show. And I'm excited to dive into this because I know it's something that affects a lot of my clients. And there's a lot of people in the world who deal with skin stuff, and it can be one of those things that's embarrassing and, challenging and frustrating and all of those things. So before we dive into all things skin and, glean as much knowledge from you as we can, I love to just get to know, how you got into doing what you do.
Well, basically, I had eczema.
There we go.
I think it's hard for most people unless you are supporting like a child or a spouse or someone close to you who is going through this. I think it's very difficult for a random person, unfortunately, to just understand the level of suffering that some people go through. I'm not going to claim to have had some severe extreme case that put me out of work and whatnot. I've worked with people who have been in those situations, and my experience was really with a form of eczema called dyshidrotic eczema that impacted the palms of my hands. And I was in grad school. I was under a ton of stress. You had asked me about stress beforehand. I was under a ton of stress. And it was the first time in my life that I really ever had eczema. I didn't even know what it was because it looked so weird. It looked like these little clear beads almost under the skin that I was like, what is that? It didn't itch or anything. And then at a certain point, I don't remember when, it was coming into summer. So it's very hot and humid, usually in the summers where I live. And the skin started to get itchy, and then things started to burn, and then the little tiny little bubbles burst, and it was just like it felt like there was that insatiable itch that you just couldn't stop. And eventually it would start to kind of heal up. You get this like really dry, flaky skin. The skin would look good for a few days, and then the cycle would start over again, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And fortunately, my father was a medical doctor. And so he's like, here's some steroid cream, just use it really sparingly, like when you really like can't deal with things, but don't overdo it. And my experience even going to the dermatologist, because I was like, Dad, there's got to be something else going on. I'm going to go talk to a dermatologist. It was like, oh boy, it was very shocking. She told me to put Vaseline on my hands to keep the moisture in, and gave me some Vanny cream and some more steroids. And that was pretty much it. And my initial impression was just like, wait, but aren't we going to figure out what's actually causing this? And there's really no drive to want to figure that out. I think if you're really, really struggling, a doctor might want to look for allergens. All the regular recommendations of use the free and clear products, don't use gloves when you wash your dishes, yada, yada, yada. But like nothing was helping, and I'd already done all of that. And so my journey was literally feeling like not everyone experiences eczema on their hands and on the palms of their feet. And until you do, you don't realize the very basic things that you do on a daily basis that involve those two areas. And so for some people with eczema or psoriasis or really deep cracking and such on the soles of the feet, can be extremely painful to move about. with eczema on the palm of your hands, it's hard to turn doorknobs. It's hard to pick things up. It's hard to touch anything because just water, not even soap, water alone burns so badly. So we take for granted so much when our skin barrier function is healthy. And when it's not, it can be more than a nuisance, to the point where you may lose sleep. You can really lose a huge amount of self-esteem. You can wake up with blood all over your sheets because you were scratching and literally like just ripping and clawing at your skin in the middle of the night without realizing it. There's so many factors that go into this that, some people go down some pretty extreme rabbit holes of like drastically changing their diet. I mean, there's so many different avenues that we can talk about. And this was my drive, was to say, well,
Yeah.
I was able to figure out, I don't know exactly what caused my issues initially, because I put together some, I was in grad school. I was like, let me just try this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this. And it took like 6 to 8 months before any flares even stopped. So I would never recommend what I did.
Right.
But the reality is that it is complex, and I do at least understand why what may work for one person doesn't work for somebody else. And also, I had started out my practice working with just like gut problems. And I came to realize that skin issues, while they are tied to the gut a good chunk of the time, it's not quite the same. There are slight variations that we have to be cognizant of. And also that there's a lot more involved in producing and making healthy skin in your body. It's not just that you eat the perfectly clean diet, or that you eat AIP, or that you use the right products. It's so much more involved because skin's just not the priority. So that's been my real drive, is to help illuminate the many different options out there that you might not ever hear at the dermatologist's office, and to help people see that it just because what worked for Sally didn't work for you, it's okay. It just means that her root causes aren't yours, and there are other ways into addressing what's going on with your skin.
Yeah, I love that. And you mentioned so many things that we could dovetail into, but I think what I really want to start is like, as you've worked with people with skin stuff, because I also actually had eczema when I was a kid. And I know mine was actually related to vaccine injury. And I've talked about this on the show before, but I out of the blue developed allergies, eczema, and asthma. And those are like the trifecta of, hey, your immune system went haywire and this is just what happened. And mine's since cleared up. But what have you found to be, some of the root causes of people dealing with skin issues, if you can really identify some?
Yeah, so actually there's 16
16.
that
Okay.
I have identified. I know. Well, this is again why I said what worked for Sally or what worked for Harry might not work for you. And
Mhm.
it's okay. It doesn't mean you failed. It doesn't mean that you've got like the evil eye, or that God hates you, or any number of these things that we sometimes feel in our worst, darkest moments of, why doesn't this work? Why? And that's why, because your combination of issues is different. So for one person, maybe they do legitimately have certain environmental allergies that are driving whatever is going on, or maybe they have a certain allergy to a particular naturally occurring chemical that is in certain products, or in like artificially made products. So that's a possibility. Like there's an allergy to balsam of Peru. I don't have an allergy to balsam of Peru. Most of my clients don't. But then I have some clients that have an allergy to lanolin, which is commonly used in vitamin
Yeah.
D supplements, and not labeled, by the way, as
Yeah.
as the source material. And so this is where it gets tricky, right? But so
Mhm.
for someone who goes, oh my goodness, I found out I have an lanolin allergy. Well, for me, that's not going to solve my eczema. I don't have a lanolin allergy. So you end up, I feel like with skin, you end up almost like playing whack-a-mole,
Mhm.
going through this process that you see other people doing, and you go, well, that worked for that person. I'm going to try this. This worked for this person. So in reality, what you want to do is take a step back and say, okay, what of these like very common root cause issues do I probably have? I can tell you right now that most people, if it's a chronic issue, definitely have a phase 2 liver detox overload. We could talk about what that means, but there is a challenge within phase 2 detoxification. Many people also have nutrient deficiencies, or at least some level of insufficiency. There is most of the time some sort of microbiome dysbiosis. Now, that could be in the gut. It could also be on the skin. We have microbiomes in all different places. And some things like parasites, which people can have, even if they haven't traveled to a third world country, can move. So they may not be just located in the gut. We then have gut dysfunction. That's another issue. I do consider diet and food reactions to just be one of the 16. That's why I really don't stress staying on elimination diets and fixating on that as the sole like needle mover for this, because I work with too many people who've like gotten down to really tiny diets as a result of that.
Yeah, me too.
But yeah, trauma, stress, there can be genetic components, thyroid dysfunction, hormone imbalances like blood sugar, estrogen dominance, autoimmunity. You can have drug reactions, mitochondrial dysfunction, heavy metals, and then environmental toxins, and then also the environmental allergen piece as well.
So a lot of things, and all things, oddly enough, that that I talked about on this show. I'm actually a big parasite fan, and have had other people that we talked about kind of the parasite route with on the show as well. But so that's a huge piece. But
yeah, I should stress that not everybody has all 16 of those.
Right.
So don't listen to that and go, oh my gosh, it's all things.
Apart. Yeah.
It's not. It means you want to look for your own combo. Most people have like maybe 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 in more challenging cases. And that way you can focus on that unique combo and start to see the needle move, rather than just like, the whack-a-mole of trying to do what everyone else has done and being like, why am I not getting any better?
Yeah. And I think it's really refreshing to hear, just for those who have maybe, tried the diet things. The probably more mainstream, like non-wellness or non-Western, has all become like gut health and skin health. They go hand in hand. And I love that you say they do, but there's other components to it as well. And
yeah, and to your point of mentioning about parasites, like you're not going to eat your way out of a parasitic infection.
No,
like,
you're not.
Like there are some problems that food, as much as I love food, and yes, it is wonderful, and food is medicine to a point, but like there are some things that food cannot fix, and that's one of the bigger concerns that I have. And then also too, if you have gut dysfunction and say, for example, have low stomach acid or not enough pancreatic enzymes, or for whatever reason, maybe you have diarrhea or constipation, so there's a problem gut function, and usually one car accident higher up will cause car accidents further down, as I like to say. But if you can't digest and absorb the food that you're eating, and if the nutrient wells are so dry, which a lot of times by the time people actually ask for help, it's usually like they've given up. They've exhausted a lot of the options, and they're so fed up. Sometimes you cannot, no matter how good your diet is, you cannot fill those wells up in an efficient manner. So you really do need to consider, how do I take this up a step? Is it that we use botanicals, right? Which I guess one could argue is still technically like food is medicine approach, because it's herbs. But then sometimes we do need to use nutritional supplementation. I work with some clients that have whittled their diets down to 5 foods. And I'm like, there's no way you're getting enough protein. A lot of their, vitamin A, vitamin D, B12, folate are in the gutter. And they're like, well, what should I eat? And I'm like, we're beyond that. Like, this is bad. Like, you have to fill these wells back up. And the time that this is going to take with food is just not conducive to you feeling better. Right. So I think we have to expand that. Food can fix some things, but not everything.
Well, and that's a good point, because it's also, and obviously you're a nutritionist, so I'm like actually really excited that we're having this conversation, because I've always maintained, and you bring up a good point, like when your symptoms are bad enough, there's a time and a place to reach for the things that are going to help bring that in check while you work on the other stuff. Like if your diet is terrible, obviously, we need to work on that, but it's a long-term game, in terms of really transforming that and how you do things versus, immediate relief. And so you're more dealing with people that need that. And I think we all have to, at some point make that decision for ourselves of like, where am I in this game? And can I take the time to, fix this with food, or do I need some extra help too? So I love that perspective. Just thought I'd point that out for our listeners. So, what are some of the things, and obviously we're not going to talk about like how you would treat certain things on here, but like, what are some of the nutrients that you find are most depleted in people that you're working with? You mentioned a few, folate and
Yeah, I will say, so folate's an interesting one. I see that a lot in folks who do carnivore and who don't eat organ meat, specifically liver. So that's always a question when I've worked with carnivore clients, because they did carnivore to try to fix
Mhm.
their skin and they're like desperate. And really, the only time I've ever seen outright low come back on a
Interesting.
conventional panel, by the way,
Okay.
was somebody were people who did carnivore but did not want to eat organ meat.
Mhm.
So that's, if you're thinking about doing carnivore, know that you will have serious nutrient depletion show up if you don't do this. If you're like me and you're not going to do the organ meat, carnivore's not the diet for you.
And by carnivore, just so I'm clear, are we
Sure.
talking like only eating meat and no vegetable, or are we?
Correct. No
Okay,
fruit, no
okay, I've,
vegetable, no
I've
plant matter.
heard about this before.
Yeah,
Um,
it's tough because there are some people that do tend to react to plant different things that are in plants. It can be the fibers, it can be different things. But
yeah,
my question is always, well, if you're reacting to those things, why? Let's find out
yeah,
why. Is there
yeah.
something
Like,
going on in your microbiome that your bugs are reacting, or your body, like salicylates, for example, are a naturally occurring chemical that's found in
mhm,
many plant foods. And a lot of times it's used to protect the plant, but there's a whole diet for eczema that's based around this like low salicylate diet. Now, if you have a legit allergy, that's a totally different matter, but most people
right,
don't. And I'm like, okay, that's not a food sensitivity. That's a phase 2 liver detox problem, because
yeah,
that's where we actually process salicylates. So if that's the case, you need more glycine and you need B6. So why are you just avoiding those really, really healthy foods? This is indicating a nutrient depletion that is functional. Like, you need that in order to do these things. We don't make glycine, we don't make B6, so you have to
right.
supplement. So I think, again, this is where the conversation becomes complex about
Mhm.
food. And the flip side is too, with going plant-based or vegan, some people say, oh, my skin really cleared up when I went plant-based or vegan. And I'm like, well, why? And 9 out of 10 times the reason it actually cleared up was because they had H. pylori and they had other gut bug problems within the GI tract. So H. pylori, they were having trouble breaking down animal protein because
Yeah,
of an H. pylori infection and low stomach acid. And so removing the meat and other animal products took this perceived burden off of their system. But in actuality, that's not great, because that means you're still going to have a problem with getting enough B12, with enough iron, with enough zinc. Like, avoiding foods, like whenever it works, I'm always like, ask the question, why does this work? Because
mhm.
it actually may point to some bigger underlying issue that needs to be addressed.
That's super interesting and a really good point. I think, we're so driven as a culture and society of like, just make my symptoms go away. And however that happens is usually acceptable, but we don't often pause to ask why. And I love to ask that question. I'm like, okay, well, why? Why? Why is this? Like, I just recently, you mentioned estrogen dominance, and, I'd been dealing with this crazy weight gain stuff that I finally figured out this spring, but I'd gone estrogen dominant, and I'm still kind of like, well, why? My stress has been really high. So that's one reason, but I don't think that's the only one. And, sometimes it helps to have someone else look at things objectively and be
It
like, oh,
does.
look at this.
Mm-hmm.
So,
It does actually. So right now, like, um, I, I think I didn't fully appreciate the complexity to. I have a large group of clients who have what I call histamine overload. Basically, it's somebody who's got. And for those listening, you might be like, oh yeah, I think I have a problem with histamine. I take a lot of antihistamines. Maybe you have asthma. Maybe you have eczema. So having itchy skin does not guarantee you have a histamine problem. I've kind of figured this out at this point. That's not a prerequisite, but you can have issues like, for example, on a CBC panel, your eosinophils will be high
mhm.
and your total IgE will be high. So I'll share a client story with you very quickly.
Yeah.
I have a client who has eczema on her hands, and she has a severe nut allergy. She's known about this allergy since 2009. And so I was like, she recently had blood work done, and her total IgE, which is normally like kind of how reactive is your system to allergens in this present moment? Like, how many allergens are you being, well, that's what we assume, that it has to do with allergies, you exposed to. Well, I said, are you still eating nuts? Like, do you have nuts in your house? And she's like, no, it was so bad and so severe. We got rid of, I'm not around any nuts at all. And I was like, then why on earth is your total IgE so high? That doesn't make any sense. She had parasites. That's why.
Yeah.
So there's actually a lot of research out there. Unfortunately, it's done and I say unfortunately because I feel like there's a lot of dismissal in the United States about, well, we don't have parasites here. That is factually incorrect. There are reports in NPR about, I think it was like Arkansas is like the hookworm capital of the world, of the United States. And like, there are things happening. There's actually research going on. I think it's somewhere, I think it might be in Portland, Oregon, on blastocystis hominis infections. Like, there is a growing problem of parasitic issues here in the United States, but it's being dismissed because a lot of the research is done in third world countries. But the research that is done has shown us that a parasitic infection can actually increase your total IgE by like 40%. And it a lot of times doesn't make any sense. So when people have these really high markers, like if I see an elevated eosinophil and the person presents with this kind of histamine overload picture, I'm like, all right, we need to look in the GI tract for sure. We need to figure out, do you have oral allergy syndrome? Some people have pollen allergies and don't realize that they're actually reactive to different herbs or botanicals that they're using, especially when it comes to liver detox. Because, for example, ragweed family. So if you have a ragweed allergy, I'm sorry to break the news to you, but you can't do liver detox supplements because milk thistle, dandelion root, and burdock are all in that family. And so your body thinks it's being exposed to ragweed, and that's causing a problem. And so you have to address liver detox from a much different perspective, unfortunately. So we can't just say, oh, I got to do a liver detox, got to do it. Like, you have to say, is this true for me? What's my situation? And so looking for oral allergy syndrome, where we're kind of having a cross-reactive issue with other foods. Sometimes, like, some people say, oh, my mouth gets fuzzy feeling or itchy, or I feel like things are swelling a bit, but not enough that it would drive you to take Benadryl. Those, for some people, they might. And it's not something that necessarily would turn into an anaphylactic, but it could. I'm always like careful. I'm like, I don't mess around with allergies. I'm like, go talk to your doctor, make sure you have the appropriate medication on hand. But this is part of the problem. You have to unravel all of this. And with estrogen dominance, higher levels of estrogen make you more sensitive to histamine, unfortunately. So it's not 100% of cases who have histamine overload have estrogen dominance, but a good portion of them do. And it's also, so I should clarify that histamine overload picture can look like chronic hives. So if you have hives, you definitely have, like that right there.
Yeah.
You have histamine overload. Eczema, sometimes. I would say about 40 to 45% of the cases that I see are histamine overload. I think this is another reason why antihistamines don't always work. Sometimes they're not enough to address the issue, and sometimes people don't have a histamine problem. It's actually other issues underneath the surface that we're itchy and stuff, and we just think that it's a histamine problem when it's not. And then some very small cases of psoriasis, like I'd say maybe 10 to 15% of psoriasis cases can also have a histamine component. Not all of them do, but some can. And rosacea can also have a histamine component for some individuals. But you also have to rule out H. pylori because that can destabilize mast cells. And then looking in the GI tract, like we were talking about how mostly you talk about gut stuff. There are certain bacteria in the gut that can produce histamine. Morganella is one species, and then the Klebsiella species. They're not all of them. Like Klebsiella pneumoniae, which we know of as being a potential autoimmune trigger for Hashimoto's, does not produce histamine. But there are some other species like Klebsiella ornithine. Those do. And certain parasites also produce histamines. And then like mold, and there's a whole bunch of things. So this is why it's so important to say my case is different. Even if I have the same diagnosis as someone else, I have to take a step back and evaluate what my exact issues are, so that way I can actually address them, because maybe like maybe I could do milk thistle, but maybe you cannot because you have an allergy, and this is why not all supplements work for certain individuals either.
That's really interesting about that, because as a kid, I actually had a ragweed allergy. So now I'm like, huh, because most of what I use for liver stuff is those things that you mentioned.
Yeah, and
Milk thistle is very common.
stevia is also in that family for ragweed. So that's
Interesting.
another one. If I don't know if people have had an aversion to, like, some people just like really don't like the taste of stevia. They find the aftertaste extremely off-putting, but I haven't been able to correlate if that's those individuals who may also have a ragweed allergy. I don't think
Yeah.
I can, but that
I've
is
come
in the ragweed
across
family.
I've come across people who will get headaches or feel really sick
Mhm.
with stevia, and so that might be where that's coming from.
Yep.
That's also very interesting. I had oh, getting back to parasites, and let's
Yeah.
talk about this phase 2 liver thing, because a big part of my approach, and it's sounding like yours too, is if your liver can't do its job, meaning like you're not going poop, there's nowhere for all the crap to go. Literally, like like the
Yeah.
toxins can't get out of your body, because that's one of the biggest ways we eliminate stuff, and the other way is through the skin and through sweat. And so maybe you can share a little bit around. I constantly talk about poop on the show, so
Oh,
actually
it's fine. I talk.
one of my best episodes, like the most response, was from an episode about poop and parasites. So,
Not a problem. I talk about poop all day with clients. So
yeah.
I always tell clients, I'm like, you just have to be straight with me. I'm not going to judge you. It's okay. We got to have a conversation about it. In terms of liver detox, so I have this pyramid that I created because I was like trying to think about, people always ask me, where do I start? And I'm like, okay, let me think about how I can explain this. And so I came up with this pyramid, and the things at the bottom are the most foundational. And so that's gut function and phase 2 liver detox. And so what happens is that, and this is what we don't account for, because it's always like, but I'm doing all the things, I'm, drinking this or whatever. So what we don't account for a lot of times is that the liver becomes depleted again of certain nutrients. And in
Right.
phase 2 of liver detox, you need nutrients to make many of these pathways run correctly. A lot of these nutrients we don't make. So if we are a nutrient consumption factory, as opposed to the idea that most of us have that we actually make most things we need to thrive and survive, that's where this disconnect can really come up. And so for me, I like to first and foremost, get poop moving. So you want to be pooping 1 to 3 times a day. You want to try to optimize and support digestion as best as possible. I usually try to be extremely cautious with any digestive aids that have betaine HCl, simply because I have so many clients that actually end up having H. pylori. So I don't want to add more acid into the stomach, especially if you have a histamine overload case. I find that betaine HCl can actually make the histamine overload worse. So I usually just stick with digestive enzymes only. And then from there, adding in glycine. So glycine powder, not from collagen. You just don't unfortunately know, like, usually you need way more than what you're going to get from collagen. I love
Yeah.
collagen, but like if you have a histamine overload problem, you can't do collagen because it's high in histamine. So glycine powder is simple, easy, inexpensive, supplementing with some of that, and then some vitamin B6 to really get the liver at least supported. That's like the basic, most bare basic thing. And then from there, I sometimes like to use other amino acids that can also support liver detox as well, but no herbs, no other B vitamins, because some people can be sensitive to B vitamins. And then in terms of like how that plays into the gut and whatnot, and how this happens, is that a lot of times, if there is a gut component to this, you have to keep in mind that those bugs produce waste. And while we would like to think that we just poop their waste out, that's not how it works. A lot of the waste goes through the gut lining, and our liver has to deal with it. And those specific pathways, like the glycine pathway, right? I've mentioned glycine like 3 times already. So there's a glycine pathway has to actually deal with those waste products from the GI tract that are produced by bugs. And so if you also have a high load coming from pesticides, solvents, paint fumes, like all different sorts of things in your environment, your glycine pathway is what detoxifies that. And you have to have glycine. You have to have B6. You have to have these things in order to repackage them to get them out of the system. And so that's why I focus on gut function and liver detoxification first, and then start moving further up. You get the system humming along, and then you can go in and start dealing with what's going on in the GI tract.
Yeah. And it's so important because, like we said, you can't deal with the GI tract until the GI tract has somewhere to go. So,
Exactly.
you
And
know,
so that's a problem like with constipation, you're
mhm.
not able to get out your own waste products. That's problem number one. Number
Right.
two, if you're constipated and you're in a quote unquote like kill phase, you're
Mhm.
sitting in things. I mean,
Yeah.
that's not a lot of times like clients, and I've seen it on symptom trackers because we do symptom tracking with our clients
Mhm.
in my practice. And there, when it's interesting to see constipation goes worse and the flare in the skin and everything goes, they all go up together. And as soon as they get pooping, you start to see all the numbers come back down. So
Yeah.
this is how important it is. Like, even if you do alter something in a protocol and you start to get constipated, your number one priority is to start using all your tools in the toolbox to get yourself pooping. Sometimes one thing like mag citrate might work great, but then if you have a really extreme slowdown, you might have to add in some allergies. Sometimes I don't like to ever really rely on senna tea, but sometimes you just need like 1 or 2 cups to kind of get things moving again, because I just say that because, so for everybody who knows, it can be an addictive
Yeah.
laxative, so you really want to be careful with that. But you have to use all the tools. Sometimes you got to pull them all out, and that's okay, but we just don't want to get constipated. It's
Yeah.
that important.
Yeah. And if you are constipated all the time, like I talk to so many women who are like, I've never pooped normally in my entire life. I'm like, well, it's probably a big part of why you're here. Like, you have to we don't want to also be reliant on all that stuff forever. Like there's got to be some discovery and okay, what's going on? Like, what are we missing? And, a lot of things we're talking about, like B6 and glycine there's essential and non-essential nutrients. And so they're the ones that our body does not produce and that we need to, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
eat.
And B6 too is important just for like regular liver function. Like your
Yeah.
enzymes, the ALT and the AST enzymes they need B6 to
Yeah.
operate. In order to make the conversions between sex hormones, you need B6. Like, there's a lot of things we need B6 for. And again, while it's lovely to go, well, I'm just going to eat B6 rich foods, I've tried looking them up. You can't get, if you really have a need, you're just not going to get enough from
Yeah.
eating B6 rich foods. They're not that rich when you actually sit down and look at how much is in there, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, and especially, I think the more we've gone through the agricultural boom, the less nutrient dense our foods are in general. So, there's a time and a place for supplementation, and this would be one of those that we're talking about right now.
Absolutely.
This has been incredibly interesting and informative for me. I don't know about everyone else listening, but I am highly intrigued by this whole conversation. I'm going to go find some glycine and B6 after this, I think.
Well, also too, I can add to
Yeah.
that. Glycine can be used as a sweetener because it actually tastes sweet. It doesn't have sugar in it, but it's a sweet tasting amino acid. And there is some interesting research as well in mostly in diabetic journals
Mhm.
about diabetics who've used glycine as a sweetener and how it can possibly be and make a improvement to I believe their blood sugar control.
Yeah.
So some of my clients will find that they really enjoy it, and I'm like, yeah, sure, use it as a sweetener, I don't care.
Yeah.
But then some people have found that it actually really helps them sleep at night. So they might mix some glycine with some magnesium, whether it's mag citrate or mag glycinate, depending on whether they're diarrhea or they're
Mhm.
constipated. And that together can really actually help improve their sleep as well.
And that just reminded me, the other thing that we talked about pre-recording here was circadian rhythm and skin. So
Yes.
maybe we can end on that note because that
Yes,
sounds
yes,
super
yes.
interesting.
Yes. So your skin has its own circadian rhythm, which I like, that kind of blew my mind. I was like, wait,
Yeah.
I thought everything operated together.
The same thing. Like what?
Yes. And so what it mostly governs, it's most important for rashes. And it doesn't matter what type of rashes you have. So when you have healthy skin barrier function, part of it is to keep it's a separation, right? It's a wall, just like the gut barriers. You can think of them in somewhat similar frames, states of being. Obviously, this keeps the outside world out of our body. It is a layer of protection, but it also is there to help keep moisture in. And so what happens is at night, the circadian rhythm of the skin causes an increased loss of water. So it's called transepidermal water loss. And so in cases, this is a lot of times why people with eczema, for example, mostly eczema, will complain that their skin becomes more dried out at night, especially overnight, and that it also becomes increasingly itchy at night. That said, itchiness at night, you can see an increase due to also like bug activity. So bugs within the system become more active at night. So fungal organisms, bacteria, parasites especially. So you can't always just blame it on that. But one really cool thing that I found in research was that zinc applied topically can help. So one of the storage spots is this epidermis of the skin, right? So it's one of the like the top layers. It's not like the absolute top, but it's one of the top layers. And so zinc is stored there. And so when we apply something with zinc to the skin, we absorb the zinc into that layer. And that zinc can help support better top transepidermal water loss. Or decrease it, I should say. It can also decrease itching and whatnot. And so it's interesting. There are a lot of nutrients that can be absorbed through the skin. Vitamin D, vitamin A, a lot of different things can, even biotin as an example. But specifically when it comes to this, it might be of benefit to you, especially if you do have pretty bad rashes or they're really itchy, to try applying some sort of zinc-based cream. It may actually help improve the quality of the skin and let it sit overnight. I don't know if I do it during the day because it usually has a white opaque tone to it.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I would also encourage, and you can share, how people can find you, but checking out some of your products and stuff, because that's the other thing and maybe we'll end on this note, but we put so much on our skin and there's so much bad stuff in it, and there's so where obviously you created your own line of stuff just to kind of broach the subject, I'm guessing, and kind of give people what they need. But how do you recommend going about, like, if you're dealing with, for example, I have clients with rosacea on their faces, like what are some things? Zinc cream at night, awesome, we can test that out.
Yeah,
But is there anything else?
Yeah, that can be sometimes helpful. The other thing too that I would share is that for some individuals and certain skin issues, like perioral dermatitis, for example, can really be triggered by oils. Like almost all oils applied to that area. So just keep that in mind. You may have to go with more like aloe based moisturizer. I think simplicity is wonderful. And I'm all about, like, if you're not in that boat, try different things. Try shea butter, try emu oil, try tallow, try, oh my goodness, there is definitely research. I know people go, but it's an omega-6, it's inflammatory, but on the skin, sunflower seed oils actually can be helpful. Yeah. I don't agree with coconut oil. So there's no coconut oil in any of my products because you just can't absorb it. It's too large of a molecule and it's just too occlusive of a barrier. And there's also a lot of coconut allergies. So I think you have to look at your skincare and say, how many ingredients are in this? And are all of these ingredients actually necessary? Now, there are some ingredients that they spell out in the scientific name. So it looks like a chemical, but it might not really be. So you might want to look it up and double check before you go, there's this in here. And then you find out it's, there was like one of those food babe moments where she was getting all upset over vinegar because it said acetic acid and it's vinegar. So we want to be cautious with that. I understand that everyone likes to dig through products and dig through ingredient lists, but the same respect, you can be allergic to anything. This is something I learned from one of my guests, Rachel Pontillo. She's been on the Healthy Skin Show a bunch. And she said, there's really no such thing as hypoallergenic. You can be allergic to anything. You can become sensitized to anything. And it may not be that particular ingredient, but it could be something that's in it. like the balsam of Peru is one example. I've
Right.
had clients that have developed all sorts of weird chemical sensitivities, like to formaldehyde, which is used on so many things that you would never know, like paper bags.
Right.
Um, and this is where it gets complicated, is we want to make sure that you're approaching things, look for simplicity, but the more irritated your skin is, you really have to educate yourself on what a skin infection is. Sometimes flares are infections, and no matter what you try putting on your skin, it's not going to make it better. You need to see a doctor and you need to determine if it's actually an infection and address it. But I would say try and look for single ingredient formulas first. See if what your skin can kind of tolerate. In the summertime, jojoba can sometimes be really nice, which acts more as like almost like the sebum of your skin as opposed to an oil per se. But then simple ingredients, simple ingredient formulas, and ask questions of the different companies. It's okay to ask questions. And also, especially if you're going to put it in very sensitive areas, so like around your eyes and or like inside your ears or anywhere in the like groin area. You want to be really, really careful. Just because it's natural doesn't mean it won't cause harm or damage that tissue. And know that I've had numerous experts talk about the problems that there are of putting certain products around the orbital area because it goes in. My dad was an ophthalmologist, so I saw firsthand people come to into his office and his practice. So just keep that in mind. You want to be really, really careful. It's okay to ask companies questions. And if they don't know the answer, that's okay too. I usually try to just flat out, if I don't know, I'm like, I just don't think it's safe. That's my feeling, because I'd rather someone not get hurt or injured by using any of our products if I'm just not 100% sure if it's okay in that particular area. So ask questions and try different things. Ask for samples to test them out first. And know that if something doesn't work for you, that's okay, but it may work wonderfully for somebody else.
Absolutely. And that's such an important thing because anything health related is there's no, Western medicine, we've tried so hard to just kind of lump everybody into one diagnosis and one treatment protocol and like that's it. But as this has been really enlightening too. We're all unique and different. And it's about figuring out what works for you and
Exactly.
not everyone else. So thank you so much, Jennifer. Just if anyone wants to connect with you or learn more, where can they go?
Yeah, they can go to my website, which is skinterrupt.com. If that's a little bit of a mouthful, healthyskinshow.com will get you there as well.
Okay.
I also have the Healthy Skin Show podcast that's available on every podcast platform where I talk about all of these different topics way in depth. We're over 200 episodes at this point.
Awesome.
And I'm also on Instagram as well at Jennifer Fugo for those who are looking for more like daily content.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been very informative and enlightening for me. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too. Thanks so much for having me.